Hello and welcome to The Cat Who Project, a podcast where we take a deep dive into Lilian Jackson Braun's world of Quill and Coco. I have been looking forward to today's episode so much because we are going to take a look at the other wonderful characters in The Cat Who Could Read Backwards, and there are some absolute gems. I think we all love the Cat Who novels so much because Lilian Jackson Braun has put so much detail into each book, and that is absolutely true of the other minor characters. They bring so much richness to the stories, and most, if not all, have some cracking lines. Now, there are quite a few minor characters, so I'm going to split this up into 2 episodes, but I'll end each part with one of my most favourite characters, so stay tuned. So I think we need to start with Arch Riker because he is Quill's oldest friend, and as we know, Arch later moves up to Pickaxe, so we get to enjoy him throughout the whole series. Arch is described as plumper and balder than he used to be, and he's a managing editor of the Daily Fluxion, and is basically Quill's new boss when Quill is hired at the start of the book. Arch and Quill are clearly old friends, but I don't think it actually says in the book where they grew up together. There is a mention that they worked together in Chicago years ago. There is also a lot of banter between the pair, and Arch doesn't shy away from having a bit of a dig at Quill, especially when it has to do with deadlines or Quill's lack of copy. But it is clearly been some time since they saw each other because Arch is not aware that Quill is no longer married, but he must still keep track of things because he is aware of Quill's recent sketchy past. Arch is a frequent flyer at the press club as much as Quill is, and his drink of choice is a scotch and water. Although later on when it's time to celebrate, he does order some martinis instead. I love that Arch got a few of his own references to cats. In Chapter 7, Arch tells Quill that his kitties are always bringing cats home. And there's another passage where Quill is complaining about being tricked into cat sitting. Arch is confused and says to Quill, "Don't you like cats?" To which Quill replies, and is talking about Coco, he says, "Sure, I like animals, and this cat is more human than a few people I could name. But he gives me the uncomfortable feeling that he knows more than I do, and he's not telling me what it is." Arch teases Quill, saying, "We have cats around the house all the time. The kids bring them home, but none of them ever gave me an inferiority complex." "But your kids never brought home a Siamese," Quill replies. Now, before we get into some of the characters that feature more in The Cat Who Could Read Backwards, let's have a look at a few who just get a brief mention. We have May Seisler, who's Quill's rival art writer from the other unnamed newspaper. She's described as quite old with bony hands, and her husband was a camouflage artist in World War I. She does get a good line though. Quill meets her at the Valentine's ball, and Quill thinks she's 10 years past retirement age. The line reads, "She offered him her bony hand and says, 'Your Mr. Montclemens is a very naughty boy, but you look like a nice young man.' Quill thanks her and says that no one has called him a young man for 20 years. There's a Mrs. Duxbury who's only mentioned once. She's described as the most important art collector in the city. Sandy Hallepay points out Mr. Ben Riggs and Mrs. Riggs, who come in French period costume to the Valentine's ball. Sandy describes Mr. Riggs' art as stringy, emaciated things that are shown at the Lambeth Gallery. It also seems that Riggs won the commission off Butchie Bolton, costing her $50,000. Tom LeBlanc cuts in on Quill's dance with Sandy Hallepay at the Valentine's ball, much to Sandy's annoyance as she thinks him an absolute bore. Tom is apparently a surly young man with the manners of a hoodlum. He is Sandy and Cal's houseboy and is being put through art school by Cal. And finally, there is Tom's girlfriend, who is not named, but who works in the check room at the art museum. She tries to dissuade Quill from going to view the Florentine collection, which only results in piquing Quill's suspicion. Now, there are some other minor characters in the book, but these get a little bit more time in the sun. There's Uncle Waldo. I love Uncle Waldo. He's a retired butcher who, of course, paints animals. He started painting at age 69 but gets hammered in a review by Mont Clements, and as a result, he stops painting. Mont Clements said that Uncle Waldo should go back to operating a meat market and leave the cows and bunny rabbits to the kids, who draw them with more imagination and honesty. I think there was also a line that age was no substitute for talent. But Quill saves the day. In Chapter 6, Quill publishes his first profile and it's on Uncle Waldo, and this results in a sellout of his work. Uncle Waldo apparently starts painting again, and his grandson, who's a truck driver, is so grateful that he drives to the offices of the Flux with a gift for Quill, 10 pounds of homemade sausage. Cal Halape features early in the book, and Quill is sent to write up a profile on him. When Quill first meets him, he doesn't even realise that he's talking to Cal Halape, the highly successful commercial artist, because he's so childlike in appearance and mannerisms. In fact, when Cal answers the door, Quill asks for his father. Early in the text, Cal is just referred to as the boy, but it turns out he actually runs a big ad agency and is personally worth a few $1 million. And remembering we're in the 1960s, so that would have been a huge amount of money. He has a big, beautiful house, kids, and a gorgeous wife. He owns an island in the Caribbean, a ranch in Oregon, and has a couple of private planes. Cal paints the kids with curly hair and rosy cheeks, and his paintings sell for a lot of money. I did find him quite irritating because he keeps talking over Quill and trying to push him into taking one of his paintings, like in a false sense of generosity. Anyway, I was glad that he wasn't featured more in the book. The Butchwalters, which I actually find really hard to say, I keep wanting to say the Butchwaters, but they are described by Sandy Halape as a short, fleshy couple. Again, what a description, it's just terrible. But Franz Butchwalter is a teacher of watercolour art at the Penniman School, and he's also having a one-man show at the West Side Gallery. Franz paints the watercolour sailboats that Quill likes so much, but he was smashed in a review by Mont Clements, who complimented only the frames of his exhibition, not even mentioning the watercolours. Mrs. Butchwalter, Sadie Butchwalter, is quite overbearing and constantly answers for her husband, even when the questions are directed to him, and then he will often just parrot her last sentence. There's one passage that illustrates this couple perfectly. It's when Quill asks them to explain what the happening is all about. She explains, "You can stand around and wait for something to happen, or you can cause things to happen, depending on your philosophy of life. I shall probably shove some of those curtains around. Franz will just wait until they fall on him." And Franz confirms this by saying, "I'll just wait until they fall on me." Now, to round up this first episode, let's finish with one of the best characters, Bruno. He's a cracking character who's a bartender at the press club. He's described as wearing a red vest and sometimes having a frowny face, other times a conspiratorial smile that brimmed with inside information. Arch describes him as an artist. He says that he gives his drinks a lot of personal expression. Bruno is constantly trying to pep up Quill's regular order of a straight tomato juice on the rocks, but never succeeds. But Bruno is indeed an artist in his own right, but his art is not anything I have actually ever come across before. He does collage, which is not unusual, of course, but he actually soaks the labels off whiskey bottles, cuts them up, and then pastes them together to make portraits of presidents. Now, that's a very specific art. I don't think I would particularly like it though, but each their own. But like all good bartenders, Bruno is a source of information for reporter Quill. He tells Quill that he thinks Earl Lambeth is a crook and that Zoe was playing around with Mont Clements. He also told Quill about the Florentine dagger that was missing and tells him that it might be a scoop for him. Quill thanks him, knowing that some of his best tips had come from press club bartenders, but also some of his worst. Well, that's it for this episode of the Cat Who Project. I hope you enjoyed it. Now stay tuned for part 2 that'll be out next week. Thanks for listening, Cat Who friends. Bye now.